Welcome to the 8th edition of the St Petersburg Florida Area News Podcast for the year 2019. I'm your host, Joshua Black, and this episode will cover the City Council Committee meeting and the full council meeting that took place on February 21st. The only committee of the day was the Co-Sponsored Events Committee. I hadn't heard the term co-sponsored events before I saw it on a Facebook post a couple days before the meeting by a man named Corey Givens Jr., a local preacher and frequent guest at City Hall. He was complaining about tax dollars not being properly accounted for when dispensed to nonprofits. Councilman Steve Cornell commented on that post that the term co-sponsored does not mean that event holders receive tax funding. They receive city services, fire, police, etc., and the city decides whether they receive a bill or not, as well as how much of that bill represents the total cost to the city. As far as I can tell, these are events that are held on city-owned outdoor properties like streets and public parks. With only 3 council members in attendance, Charlie Gerdes was selected to continue as chair, Ed Montanari was selected for vice chair, and Darden Rice joined the committee as a new member. The good thing about Rice being new to the committee was that the staff and other council members were patient with explanations of terms and concepts. Co-sponsored events are required by ordinance to benefit a nonprofit. That requirement can be waived by council. Any outdoor event planned for city-owned property that plans to serve alcohol, charge admission, or raise money must be a co-sponsored event. Only a nonprofit can apply to hold a co-sponsored event unless council waives that requirement too. Selling alcohol requires another waiver, and selling hard liquor requires a second waiver after that. This is on top of 2 additional meetings with staff from various departments being required after the council approves the event. All of this is explained throughout a 16-page application. It sounds reasonable if you accept the premise that government has legitimate reason to own properties that aren't devoted to finding justice for victims. I don't accept that premise because it is excluded by the instructions given to government in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. If someone is not doing harm to his neighbor, it really isn't the business of the government. Most of the main council meeting was similar. Lots of regulations and debates about things that would not exist if we had a Bible-sized government. Remember that God only gave Israel 613 statutes to follow, and Jesus rescinded up to 2/3 of them with his death and resurrection. The chapters in the ordinance code of the city of St. Petersburg are far more than 613, and that's just the chapters, not the sections, subsections, or paragraphs. But the rejection of biblical limits on government does not explain the unhealthy obsession that all of our council members have with federal funds. Congressman Charlie Crist stopped by to give a report and to hear from his local government constituents, and nearly every council member in attendance had a request or two that would mean millions of dollars from the federal treasury. There were clearly no lessons learned from the shutdown. Crist's assistant wrote down the requests of council members, but Crist still plans to attend the Lair committee meeting scheduled for March 15th, a Friday, not the usual Thursday, unless Council Vice Chair Ed Montanari, the chair of that committee, gave incorrect information. Council also heard a marina upgrade update from staff. Safe Harbor, a for-profit entity that leases the Harborage Marina from the city and is fully responsible for its upgrades, made an unsolicited bid to take over the downtown marinas and give them the necessary millions in upgrades. When I say millions, I mean millions. Chris Palestra and his team gave a report showing that bringing the entire marina up to code with the desired sustainability measures will require an investment in the neighborhood of the middle to upper 8 figures. I saw $39 million on one slide and $80 million on another. What isn't discussed is that leasing city-owned properties protects wealthy investors from taxes and from some liabilities. Thus, the wealthy get shields that are unavailable to the poor from the government. The poor have borne the brunt of the cost of building these properties, but they get no use of them. Most poor people don't own the boats and never will, and they receive no payment from them, as they would if this had been a real investment. Same with the Mahaffey Theater, which has experienced rejuvenation with the partnership with Bill Edwards. A presentation from that manager in concert with city staff showed the major improvements that Edwards and his group have made with city-owned building and concert venue. They reveled in the fact that the venue is now sought after by more noteworthy acts than before. But no one noticed the fact that Edwards is using what the poor paid for as a launch pad for his work. Council members even offered to throw more tax dollars at the building, as well as to lift any contrary regulations that would stifle future improvements. The latter proposal isn't wrong, but the former is. Speaking of city-owned property, USF St. Petersburg wants to lease a building at 250 8th Avenue Southeast. I used to deliver sandwiches to that place. If I'm not mistaken, the Coast Guard used to be there, but don't quote me on that. The lease is for 2 years, and the university president says he intends to use it for new classes they are trying to establish for next semester. Council approved unanimously. When the sewer report came up, Claude Tankersley reported that TICO is willing to experiment with accepting the city's new waste treatment plan to turn human waste into biosolids. To turn biosolids into fuel. The city must produce the fuel for a full month before TICO will test it. Then TICO will continue to have the product tested for usability every month for 5 more months. If all the tests go well, then the city will have firmly established the sale of biosolid fuel with the utility. Claude also noted that there were 2 recent spills. One with reclaimed water happened when a pipe was burst by a pump, and one with sewage happened when a contractor installing a post cracked a sewage pipe. Now, when Brajesh came to ask for $35,777 for a study for the pier, City Council finally balked. Not when staff requested millions for seawalls using TIF funding that was supposed to be intended for blight. Not when facing cost overruns in the millions of dollars, but now on a $35,000 request for study. Why? Because staff had included an illegible schematic with the backup materials. When Montanari asked staff to increase the size of the font in the photos, they showed 91 signs planned for the Pier Park property. Remember that the Pier Park plan was sold as a green space idea, and Montanari doesn't like sign clutter. Staff insisted that the schematic was unrelated to the request, but council members wondered how that could be, while voicing their concerns that signage would overrun the park. In the midst of discussion, things turned hostile as Deputy Mayor Kanika Tomlin turned territorial over the future of the signs. She stated that administrative functions are outside the council's purview, even though the council must approve funding for any project done by administration. Her insistence riled several council members, and they decided instead to refer the requested action to a council committee. Wish they had this kind of spine when it was millions of dollars for seawalls. During the public hearing for new ordinances, the second reading for the Central Avenue Corridor Overlay was delayed until April. As expected, the part of the new ordinance that implements the bonus structures is welcomed by the people affected, but the zoning portion is not. We'll see what becomes of the ordinance in the future. Couldn't tell if they'd split the ordinance or not. Finally, the only quasi-judicial meeting was a zoning change requested by a church to have part of its property rezoned to the same designation as the neighborhood behind it. The plan is to turn that property into single-family homes. It appears to have been used previously as a parking lot. There were no opponents, and staff recommended approval. I can't imagine how much money the church was required to waste on this action just to sell its own lot to a developer to help reduce the housing shortage in St. Petersburg. This should have been a private, quiet matter, but it was uselessly regulated instead, having a legally required process that made literally no difference in the outcome except for the money out of pocket for the applicant. The quasi-judicial hearing planned for February 28th is supposed to include the Driftwood Neighborhood Historic Designation. We will be there. Thank you for listening. This has been St. Petersburg Florida Area News, production of the Reconstructionist Radio Network.